Nostalgia. Maybe, like Marcel, Monsieur Proust, in Paris, it begins with a bite of a madeleine. Or, like Hemingway, with a tumbler of whiskey and a tumbling out of wistful stories. Or breathing in the scent of autumn leaves, or the aroma of baking bread, a homemade pie, a Sunday roast. Or the incense of fresh brewed coffee coiling through the early morning air. It might be a song or a tune that carries you back to the days and arms of a once love, or a deeply felt place, or a poignant life moment. It could be a certain look, a forgotten sound, the turn of a phrase, a face you see in a film or a crowd. Touchstones that touch you so unexpectedly, serendipitously, sweetly to bittersweetly. Unite you, longingly, feelingly, with a suddenly very present past, and possibly inspire you to have newly evocative experiences. Maybe making memories that somewhere, sometime in the future, become as deeply emotional, sentimental, and lastingly beautiful. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in, for bringing yourself in to this shared listening time. It's lovely to have you here for show 180, coming to you live from the memory-laned coast of Rhode Island. This is your poet and guiding spirit in the poetosphere, Colin Goedecke, a voice here and elsewhere for living our days more fully, more lively, more poetically. Last week's broadcast, if you weren't listening, was The Stranger, how we perceive, relate to, interact with strangers, often prejudge, preclude them, our conditioned, preconceived ideas of, associations around, and encounters with them. People who, at root, are simply others or another person we just don't know yet. How we ourselves are strangers in some other people's eyes and minds. How most of the billions of us in the world are strangers to each other. It cuts both ways. And how, while we may on the surface appear to be outsiders, are part of one shared humanity, with a choice we can always make to be compassionate, to connect from our pure humanness, despite any differences of appearance or language, customs, or beliefs. Well, this week, our theme is nostalgia. Those feelings we have, from the wistful to the bittersweet to the deeply sentimental, about things and people and moments in life past, including childhood, our youth, some treasured aspects of once upon a time living, or former way or ways of being, that something in our present touchstones us back to. And yes, the longings, pinings, sometimes desired relivings that we do. The invoked or evoked reminiscings that come upon us. Beautiful to feel as long as we don't wind up living there and disappearing from being present here where we are today. So I've curated for you, for us, a show of cultural commentary, quotes, poetry, and anecdotes around nostalgia for us to enter and discover together, poetically and maybe very nostalgically. Well, let's begin by doing some time traveling. In the Lawantica woods, in the New Jersey countryside, late April 2017, I'm 7 again. Early spring, up in the boughs of the old apple tree of my childhood, a place to float in the clouds, of fresh and fragrant white blossoms, feeling my young body sing with the new-sprung bird song, with my sweet boyness, innocence, that the scent of today's tree takes me half a century back to. New York, March 2002, a poem for Old Man Daddy. My grandfather's figs. My grandfather was a sweet-feeling fellow, swaying 6'6" in black wingtips and trademark bow tie, like the mast of an old sailing ship, scudding along on a steady wind of whiskey sours and sentimental moods. Those holiday toasts where he rose and towered in the pale green dining room filled to the brim with family, eyes wet with tears and wine. Those still cool spring days on the small glass porch where he'd sit in half spectacles, bushy brows, and buttoned-up polo, a soft swath of sunny yellow, talking about his fig trees, the little ones you could see there in the garden, all wrapped in burlap, the figs he was, like me, so grandfatherly tending. Billy Collins, Nostalgia. Remember the 1340s? We were doing a dance called the catapult. You always wore brown, the color craze of the decade, and I was draped in one of those capes that were popular, the ones with unicorns and pomegranates and needlework. Everyone would pause for beer and onions in the afternoon, and at night we would play a game called Find the Cow. Everything was hand-lettered then, not like today. Where has the summer of 1572 gone? Brocade and sonnet marathons were the rage. We used to dress up in the flags of rival baronies and conquer one another in cold rooms of stone. Out on the dance floor we were all doing the struggle while your sister practiced the Daphne all alone in her room. We borrowed the jargon of farriers for our slang. These days language seems transparent, a badly broken code. The 1790s will never come again. Childhood was big. People would take walks to the very tops of hills and write down what they saw in their journals without speaking. Our collars were high and our hats were extremely soft. We would surprise each other with alphabets made of twigs. It was a wonderful time to be alive, or even dead. I am very fond of the period between 1815 and 1821. Europe trembled while we sat still for our portraits. And I would love to return to 1901, if only for a moment, time enough to wind up a music box and do a few dance steps, or shoot me back to 1922 or 1941, or at least let me recapture the serenity of last month when we picked berries and glided through afternoons in a canoe. Even this morning would be an improvement over the present. I was in the garden then, surrounded by the hum of bees and the Latin names of flowers, watching the early light flash off the slanted windows of the greenhouse and silver the limbs on the rows of dark hemlocks. As usual, I was thinking about the moments of the past, letting my memory rush over them like water rushing over the stones on the bottom of a stream. I was even thinking a little about the future, that place where people are doing a dance we cannot imagine, a dance whose name we can only guess. Thank you, Billy Collins. Nostalgia from his collection Questions About Angels, which is delightful. I get such a kick out of that. It's a whole other take on nostalgia, isn't it? Didn't know we were going to go that far back, did you? From Wikipedia, nostalgia is a sentimentality for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. The word is a learned formation of a Greek compound meaning homecoming, a Homeric word, and another meaning sorrow or despair, and was coined by a 17th century medical student to describe the anxieties displayed by Swiss mercenaries fighting away from home. Described as a medical condition, a form of melancholy in the early modern period, it became an important trope in Romanticism. It is associated with longing for the past, its personalities, possibilities, and events, especially the, quote, good old days or a, quote, warm childhood. lends itself to rosy retrospection for people to view the past more favorably and the future more negatively. When applied to one's beliefs about a society or institution, this is called declinism, which has been described as a, quote, trick of the mind and as a, quote, emotional strategy to snuggle up when the present day seems intolerably bleak. Well, maybe a lot of people are waxing far more nostalgic right now in these very trying times of ours. I'm going to take some more soundings on that. Anyway, a little more from Wikipedia. It sometimes involves memories of people one was close to, and thus it can increase one's sense of social support and connections, which is very good. Serves as a motivator for the preservation of people's cultural heritage. Serves as a coping mechanism and helps people to feel better about themselves. Correlates positively with one's sense of meaning in life. A song heard once at a specific moment and then not heard again until a far later date will give the listener a sense of nostalgia for the date remembered and events that occurred then. Old movies can trigger it, old television shows, and nature-based factors such as weather and temperature can trigger it. Scientific studies have shown that cold weather makes people more nostalgic, while nostalgia causes people to feel warmer. How about that? Didn't know that. And on and on. So, I just wanted to share a little bit of that. That was interesting. Yes, but aromas, they can not only be delightful, but powerful in their ability to stir us and transport us back in time or place, as this poem of mine did, and maybe does for you. This is from New York City, November 2002, on the Upper West Side of New York, where I lived for a long time. The first scents of winter. Resinous plumes of pine from the first sidewalk trees, mixing with the aromatic zest of a greengrocer's clementines. The cornucopial bouquet of roast turkey, stuffing, and nutmegged pumpkin pie. The cold white perfume of the first frost. What about candlelight? Consider how that can summon all kinds of feelings, including nostalgia. This is luz de vela, candlelight. You, who bring such comfort to the darkness, spires of meditation to the stillness, who tenders light with simple gracefulness, you who dances on tables and faces bedclothes and bathwaters, who enchants the mind's eye to flicker back through rooms and nights, dinners and gardens, romances, remembrances of other moving candlelit moments, and glows on faithfully thousands of years and stories and many a poet's heart-soft reveries later, O luz de vela. Marcel Proust said, remembrance of things past is not necessarily the remembrance of things as they were. From the New Yorker, I found this very wonderful, longer piece, but I'll give you a bit of it, by Michael Chabon, the author. One of his books was The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. You may have read some of his work, Chabon's. So here's from that piece from 2017. I recently had a brief chat with a 100-year-old Jew. His name is Manuel Bromberg, and he's a resident of Woodstock, New York. Mr. Bromberg had written me a letter to tell me that he had read and liked my latest book. And in the letter he mentioned that in a few days he would be hitting the century mark, so I thought I'd call him up and wish him a happy 100th. As we chatted, I realized that I was talking to a man almost exactly the same age as my grandfather, were he still alive. I mean my real grandfather, Ernest Cohen, some of whose traits, behaviors, and experiences, along with those of his brothers, brothers-in-law, and other men of their generation in my family, of Mr. Bromberg's generation, helped me to shape the life and adventures of the hero of that book, as my memories of my grandmothers and their sisters and sisters-in-law helped shape my understanding of that book's, quote, my grandmother. I have always been, to a fault, it has at times seemed, a good boy. At family gatherings, at weddings and bar mitzvahs, from the time I was small, among all my siblings and cousins, I always felt a sense of dutifulness about hanging out with the old people, enduring their interrogations, remedying their ignorance of baffling modern phenomena such as wacky packages or David Bowie, and above all, listening to their reminiscences. The dutifulness of a good boy is not, of course, the whole explanation. I'm not that good. My work has at times been criticized for being overly nostalgic or too much about nostalgia. That is partly my fault, because I actually have written a lot about the theme of nostalgia, and partly the fault of political and economic systems that abuse nostalgia to foment violence and to move units. But it's not nostalgia's fault, if fault is to be found. It is a valid, honorable, ancient human emotion, so nuanced that its subvariants have names in other languages. German's Sehnsucht, Portuguese saudade, that are generally held to be untranslatable. Or actually, it's Sehnsucht. Sorry about that. The nostalgia that arouses such scorn and contempt in American culture, predicated on some imagined greatness of the past or inability to accept the present, is the one that interests me least. The nostalgia that I write about, that I study, that I feel, is the ache that arises from the consciousness of lost connection. Nostalgia, most truly and most meaningfully, is the emotional experience, always momentary, always fragile, of having what you lost or never had, of seeing what you missed seeing, of meeting the people you missed knowing, of sipping coffee in the storied cafes that are now hot yoga studios. It's the feeling that overcomes you when some minor, vanished beauty of the world is momentarily restored, whether summoned by art or by the accidental enchantment of a painted advertisement for Sen or, say, Bromo Seltzer, hidden for decades, then suddenly revealed on a brick wall when a neighboring building is torn down. In that moment, you are connected. You have placed a phone call directly into the past and heard an answering voice. "Thank you, Mr. Bromberg," I said just before I hung up. Not sure what I was thanking him for exactly, but overcome with gratitude all the same, both of us aware, I suppose, as we made tentative plans to meet sometime soon, or at least to talk again, that the next time I called, there might be no one on the other end of the line. Thank you, Michael Chabon. Wonderful. Love that. Well, let me ask you some questions as we go along here about nostalgia. How sentimental are you? Have you always been that way, either very much so or not so or somewhere in between? Or did something in life come about that brought you there? Curious. When was your last trip down memory lane? Where did it take you? And how was the ride? Is there any time of your life you'd like to relive? If so, when and why? What are you pining or longing for, quietly or vocally? Maybe some lost innocence of childhood or self or the world? What do you reminisce about most often? If you wrote a memoir, what would the title be? And what would you write about the life you had, that you lived back in time, compared to the one that you have now? What triggers nostalgia in you? Is it a scent, or a song, or a kind of weather, or a certain dish of food you make or eat? And what's the frequent emotion it raises in you? Is it softness or sweetness, bittersweetness, comfort, regret? What made your parents nostalgic? What people do you feel most nostalgic around? Could you have some nostalgia, as Chabon was talking about, for an era that you never lived but somehow love? I know I've always felt drawn to the 1930s, from the films and the songs and the clothes and the faces to the phrases, flavors and atmospheres of that decade, experiencing them vicariously but also somehow belongingly. Well, things to think about, feel into, observe, and appreciate, dear listeners. I hope you will. I definitely have a deep wistfulness about my childhood summers. They were such golden times, barefoot and carefree times by the sea. Here are a few poems that touchstone me there in memory and feeling, and maybe, in a way, you, if that was a place of great joy in your past. This was out on the South Fork of Long Island at Bridgehampton, July 1998, when I composed this, or it came into me, as they often do. Memory of a sea-shaped youth. The ocean dazzles the eye today, sparkling as far as the horizon. The water rushes the shore, regathers itself, waits, and rushes again, each time breathing out an essence of innocence, a bouquet of childhood days at the beach. Happily, vividly remembering childhood summers in the place where I spent most of them. Some I did with my cousins on Long Island half the summer, but a lot of times was my family's place in Bay Head, New Jersey, a little town on the New Jersey coast. This is the barber in the dell, who wore a green plastic visor the color of a ginger ale bottle, who had a raspy voice and Charles Coburn kind of face. A forever bachelor who wore spectacles he could barely see through, which is why he sometimes clipped your ear with his quick silver scissors. Whose name was the same as the sign on the window by the striped pole, Dell's. Whose small, single-story shop and sole chrome and leather chair sat between the shingled houses facing Twilight Lake, in the town by the sea where my boyhood summers swam, where my mother brought my young head of sun-blonde hair to be cut now and then by the green-visored old barber in that dell. Love thinking back to that time and those moments. Lloyd Schwartz, Nostalgia, the lake at night. The black water, lights dotting the entire perimeter, their shaky reflections. The dark tree line, the plap-plapping of water around the pier, creaking boats, the creaking pier, voices in conversation, in discussion, two men, adults, serious inflections, the words themselves just out of reach. A rusty screen door spring and the door swinging shut. Footsteps on a porch, the scrape of a wooden chair. Footsteps shuffling through sand, animated youthful voices. How many? Distinct, disappearing. A sudden guffaw, some giggles, a woman's, no, a young girl's. Sarcastic reply, someone's assertion, a high-pitched male cackle. Somewhere else, a child laughing. Bug zappers. Tires whirring along a pavement, not stopping, receding. Shadows from passing headlights. A cat's eyes caught in a headlight. No moon. Connect the dot constellations filling the black sky, the ladle of the Big Dipper not quite directly overhead. The radio tower across the lake signaling. Muffled quacking near the shore, a frog belching, crickets, cicadas, katydids, etc., their relentless sexual messages. A sudden gust of wind, branches brushing against each other, pine, beach. A fiberglass hull tapping against the dock. A sudden chill. The smell of smoke, wood stove fires. A light going out. A dog barking, then more barking from another part of the lake. A burst of quiet laughter. Someone in the distance calling someone too loud. Steps on a creaking porch. A screen door spring, the door banging shut. Another light going out. You must have just undressed for bed. My bare feet on the splintery pier, turning away from the water. Beautiful. Thank you, Lord Schwartz. New to me, him and Nostalgia, the Lake at Night, from his collection Cairo Traffic. I have to read more of him. Brenda Shaughnessy's poem, Visitor. I am dreaming of a house just like this one, but larger and opener to the trees, nighter than day and higher than noon, and you visiting, knocking to get in, hoping for icy milk or hot tea or whatever it is you like. For each night is a long drink in a short glass, a drink of black sound water, such a rush and fall of lonesome, no form can contain it. And if it isn't night yet, though I seem to recall that it is, then it is not for everyone. Did you receive my invitation? It is not for everyone. Please come to my house, lit by leaf light. It's like a book with bright pages filled with flocks and glens and groves and overlooked by Pan, that seductive satyr in whom the fish is also cooked. A book that took too long to read but minutes to unread, that is to forget. Strange are the pages thus, nothing but the hope of company. I made too much pie in expectation. I was hoping to sit with you in a treehouse in a nightgown, in a real way. Did you receive my invitation? Written in haste before a leaf blinked out, before the idea fully formed. An idea like a storm cloud that does not spill or arrive, but moves silently in a direction. Like a dark book in a long life, with a vague hope in a wood house with an open door. Thank you, Brenda. Shaughnessy, Visitor. From the Marginalian, or via the Marginalian, How We Become Who We Are. This is the essayist Megan Daum on nostalgia, aging, and why we romanticize our imperfect younger selves. This is from her book, The Unspeakable and Other Subjects of Discussion, a collection of personal essays examining, quote, the tension between primal reactions and public decorum and aiming at a, quote, larger discussion about the way human experiences too often come with pre-assigned emotional responses. I was going to give you a little bit from this book. She reflects on the disorienting fact that nothing she ever does will ever be preceded by the word young again. She writes, any traces of precocity I ever had are long forgotten. I am not and never again will be a young writer, a young homeowner, a young teacher. I was never a young wife. The only thing I could do now for which my youth would be a truly notable feature would be to die. If I died now, I'd die young. Everything else, I'm doing middle-aged. I am nostalgic for my 20s, most of them anyway. 20 and 21 were squandered at college. 24 was kind of a wash, too. But I can tell you for sure that they weren't as great as I now crack them up to be. I was always broke, I was often lonely, and I had some really terrible clothes, but my life was shiny and unblemished. Everything was ahead of me. I walked around with an abiding feeling that at any given time, anything could go in any direction, and it was often true. And she has other good things to say in that book and in that commentary about that book from The Marginalian. And she says at one other point before I leave this with you and us, you have no ballast, you have no tailwinds either. You hardly ever know what to do because you've hardly done anything. I guess that's why wisdom is supposed to be the consolation prize of aging. It's supposed to give us better things to do than stand around and watch in disbelief as the past casts long shadows over the future. Thank you, Megan Dahl. John Goethe, Koethe. That's how I would pronounce it in German anyway. Maybe even, Goethe. Above a coast that lies between two coasts, Flight 902 turns west toward San Diego. Milwaukee falls away. The constant passenger, removed from character and context, resumes his California story, gradually ascending, reading Farewell, My Lovely, for the umpteenth time, like a book above the world or below the noise. I recall some houses halfway in the desert, and how dry the trees all seemed, and temporary. Even the tallest buildings looked, with bungalows decaying in the Santa Ana wind. And finally, just how small it was and mean. It is nostalgia for the limited that makes the days go quickly, tracing out their spirals of diminishing concern. Like all the boys who lived on Westland Avenue, I learned to follow the trails through the canyon, shoot at birds with a BB gun, and dream of leaving. What are books? To me, they seemed like mirrors, holding up a vision of the social in which people, beckoning from their inaccessible preserves like forgotten toys, afforded glimpses of those evanescent worlds that certain minor writers, Raymond Chandler say, or even Rupert Brooke, could visualize somehow and bring to life again. And though these worlds were sometimes difficult to see, once having seen them, one returned to find the words still there, like a part of the surroundings, compliant to one's will. Yet these are attitudes, and each age has its separate store of attitudes. its store of tropes, in Grantchester that filter through its dreams and fill its songs. Hume tried to show that sympathy alone does the happiness of stranger to affect our lives, yet now and then a phrase echoing in the mind, long after its occasion seems to resurrect a world I think I recognize and never saw. For what was there to see? Some houses on a hill next to a small stream? A village filled with people I couldn't understand? Could anyone have seen the transitory sweetness of the Georgians' England and the world before the war, before the wasteland? Years are secrets, and their memories are often stories of a past that no one witnessed, like the fantasies of home one builds to rationalize the ordinary way one's life has gone since then. Words seem to crystallize that life in pictures, in a postcard of a vicarage or of a canyon wedged between the desert and an endless ocean, but their clarity is fleeting. I can nearly see the coast from here, and as I hear the engines and the bell chimes, all those images dissolve. And then I start to hear the murmur of that constant voice, as distant from me as a landscape studied from an airplane, a contingent person with a particular mind and a particular will, descending across a desert, westward over mountains and the sparsely peopled scrub beyond the city, pocked with half-filled reservoirs and rudimentary trails with nothing waiting for me at the end. And is there honey still for tea? But isolated houses nestled in the hills. Thank you, John Goedecke, the constant voice from his collection North Point North. What about certain reminiscings that can be so sweet and satisfying, especially of timelessly delightful times we've had where there was a magical alchemy of place and people and spirit, just the right atmosphere. Like here 25 years ago, Bridgehampton, New York, July 1998. These were for wonderful old friends of the time, Louis and Suzanne, toward the Lavender Hour out on the South Fork of Long Island. You, Picasso aigu, in your summer straw, shading blue eyes and sailor stripes, juggling a bubble of cold wine, your long demoiselle sheathed in black, head full of blonde oak leaves, hydrangea eyes, begonia lips blossoming a kiss. The fragrant hedges bumbling with morning memories of bees, now lushed with evening sun and soon a layer of lavender light. Here under the swishing of clouds soft over the lawns, and the fields singing with redwings and pizzicatos from the darkening boughs, where an eye full of moon will peer in to see us savoring the night. We heard mention of the Portuguese untranslatable word or feeling of the word saudade, S-A-U-D-A-D-E, saudade. Well, here's my piece called Sometimes Saudade, from Cobble Hill, Brooklyn, in April 2017, where I had 4 different poet in residencies over a couple of years, also infusing and inspiring they were. It opens with this quote, Dino saudade tuas. Sometimes the longing sings so soul-deep, so untranslatably, like the Portuguese, into speechless, languageless moments, days when saudade surprises and suffuses my body, spirit, cells, mixes them with waves of sinking and swelling, missing and yearning, sweetness and bittersweetness, aching and gladness, for all the wonders, the sense memories of the bliss found and lost, of swimming in the sun, sea, and wild air of great love, of being once with another greatly free-flowing, waking, and dreaming lover. Another Billy Collins for us, for you. Pornography. In this sentimental painting of rustic life, a rosy-cheeked fellow in a broad hat and ballooning green pants is twirling a peasant girl in a red frock while a boy is playing a squeeze box near a turned-over barrel upon which rests a knife, a jug, and small drinking glass. 2 men in rough jackets are playing cards at a wooden table. And in the background, a woman in a bonnet stands behind the half-open Dutch door, talking to a merchant or a beggar who is leaning on a cane. This is all I need to inject me with desire, to fill me with the urge to lie down with you, or someone very much like you, on a cool marble floor or any fairly flat surface, as clouds go flying by and the rustle of tall leafy trees mixes with the notes of bird song. So clearly does the work speak of vanishing time, obsolete musical instruments, passing fancies, and the corpse of the largely forgotten painter mouldering somewhere beneath the surface of present-day France. Thank you, Billy Collins. Well, there are the places we're wistful for, yes, nostalgic about. What are yours? This is from Farrar, Straus, and Giroux, a Q&A with the writer Luc Sant on Paris, nostalgia in the neoliberal city. I just liked part of this conversation he had back in time some years back. The writer and critic reveals his nostalgia for an older Paris, mourns the city's disappearing cafe culture, and touches on the urban defects of neoliberalism. But in the beginning, the interviewer says, "Did you feel yourself becoming nostalgic while writing the book?" And he says, "Yes and no. It's never entirely clear what people mean when they say something is nostalgic. There's a lot of use of that term. When you're interested in the past, you're nostalgic because our duty is to the future. You get this a lot from believers in technology, and nostalgia becomes this way of dismissing the fact that we have a past and that the past is interesting and that there are many things that were dumped alongside the road in the great race toward progress that really deserve to be picked up and examined." It's true that this does involve some nostalgia for me. As I mentioned, I've spent a lot of time in Paris over the years. I remember Les Halles. I don't remember it well. I was only a kid and a visitor. I definitely remember when you could just hang out in cafes all day long, including some that have become rather famous and prohibitively expensive. I remember when, and this was true of all the cities in the world, you could get a really good meal for $3 or $4. I do have a section in the book about people lamenting the past and how everything was better before. And you can trace this back to the middle of the 19th century before Baron Haussmann. But I do believe that a real nerve was touched, or rather a blood vessel burst, around the early 1980s, which is when neoliberal economic ideology became policy. It started in different times and in different places with the elections of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. It happened a tad later in France, but the ground had been prepared earlier. I think that was actually a betrayal. I know there's a lot of people that would not have liked a lot of the physical conditions of my life when I lived in New York City in the 70s, the rats, the crime, the drugs, the junkies, but nevertheless, you can't deny that there was this central feature of the city, which was that everyone could live there if they wanted. Now they can no longer do so, and that's true with close to every major city in the Western world. Thank you, Luc Sant. Well, we're speaking of Paris, and we spoke of Proust at the beginning, so I think we just must speak of him a moment more here, and his classic, In Search of Lost Time. This is from Wikipedia. In Search of Lost Time, à la recherche du temps perdu. First translated into English as Remembrance of Things Past, a novel in 7 volumes by French author Marcel Proust. Early 20th century work, his most prominent, known both for its length and its theme of involuntary memory. The most famous example of this is the episode of the Madeleine. It follows his recollections of childhood and experiences into adulthood in the late 19th century and early 20th in high society France, while reflecting on the loss of time and lack of meaning in the world. Well, I was going to share with you actually some of my recallings of France. I had it on another program back in time, whose title I've forgotten exactly, but France is in the title if you want to look back in the playlist. And this was, I believe, the lead-in poem for that broadcast, Les souvenirs et les rêveries, memories and reveries. But I'll share that for another time. I wanted to talk a little bit. I've got some other things, some wonderful things to share, more. And some of that is movies. As I was musing away for us, films that evoking a lot of nostalgia, films I love, you may too, and nostalgia of different kinds. So in no particular order, This is from Taste of Cinema on movies that will make you feel nostalgic, and they mention Sunset Boulevard. Well, that goes back, I've forgotten exactly what year that was, but I think it was in the 40s, early 40s, or somewhere in there. Sunset Boulevard, apart from being a scathing indictment on Hollywood culture, is also a warning against unhealthy nostalgia. It takes place in an interesting time in Hollywood history where silent film stars could still remember the good old days. This is the case of Norma Desmond. Gloria Swanson played that. A silent-era movie star rejected by the new kind of film known as the talkie. She cannot bring herself to accept the terrifying present and constantly lives in the past. And her loyal butler, Max, played by Erich von Stroheim, dedicates his life in feeding her the illusion of stardom. That's quite wild and still in its way. Stand By Me, do you remember that? This says, suddenly you see a face from the past you hadn't seen or thought about in years. You're brought back to a different time, to a different life. It brings things into perspective, even if it doesn't really change anything. That's what happens to middle-aged Gordy LaChance. Richard Dreyfuss played that as the film opens with him sitting in his car, parked on the side of the street, deep in thought as he looks down on a newspaper headline. American Graffiti, another one. There was something special about the style of 1950s Americana, a reason why you still have so many 50s and 60s diners. The style, the music, the clothing, the beautiful silliness that was considered hip in those days, the lousy but oh-so-cool American cars, the ridiculous dancing, the hairstyles, women going batshit crazy when Elvis swung his hips, women in dresses, men in tucked-in shirts. Before the beat poets and the hippies would change everything, before Kent State, before the horrifying pictures from Vietnam, before Watergate, before the growing distrust against American institutions, the American dream was still alive. Not everything was part of some big corporate conglomerate. Therapy was only for crazy people, and now all of this is gone, and we are all the better for it. American Graffiti. Radio Days, Woody Allen. I'm going to go back and look at that again. I remember that made a big impression. It's a lesser known, I would say, and often forgotten work of his, but it's about the preciousness and fragility of memories. It's unlike other of his films. It doesn't revolve around the neurotic follies of romantic relationships. There's no real story, just the scrambled reminiscence of the narrator as he recounts his youth from the late 30s to the mid-40s, full of innocence, with a little wickedness that comes with being a child. And it's about the radio stories that he heard in that time and the characters that crept into his imagination. Radio Days. And then there's Cinema Paradiso. Won an Academy Award in 1990. Giuseppe Tornatore's evocative ode to childhood and cinema, steeped in romance and longing. If you haven't, Ennio Morricone did the score. A wonderful film. I've seen that many, many times. So if you haven't seen it or haven't seen it lately, maybe you will. Maybe you'd like to. I was thinking of songs, too. And maybe you've been thinking of songs as we've been going along here. That take you to a nostalgic place. There is such a world of evocative songs and music, other kinds, surely something that reverberates in you, mind or heart somewhere, meaningful from another time in your life. This is Torna a Sorrento, Return to Sorrento. As I sleep, I sing Torna a Sorrento in a paper lantern-lit garden, making my voice sound like an old cathedral radio or Caruso on the Victrola. And I accompany myself on an antique accordion like an antique Italian, but this one a concertina strung with small glass beads that glow when I open the folded bellows. Ma non me la sa, until I end with a nostalgic voice that crackles and yellows beautifully. Fa me campa. Torna a Sorrento. How about Sentimental Journey from the 40s? Time magazine had this set of songs, all-time 100 songs. Our critics picked the most extraordinary English-language popular recordings since the beginning of Time magazine in 1923, and so this is one of the 100 of them. It says, all aboard for a nostalgia trip with Les Brown and his band of renown. So this was Doris Day's debut. It's exactly many GIs were hoping to do when it came out in 1944. The aching nostalgia struck a chord in a nation welcoming its boys back from the front lines. If any song could make your heart yearny for the old hometown, this little train could, says the squib here. But it describes someone about to take a train to a place to which they have a great emotional attachment, and their mounting anticipation while wondering why they ever roamed away. And you may remember it, and you certainly may remember the opening verse. Gonna take a sentimental journey, gonna set my heart at ease, gonna make a sentimental journey to renew old memories. Yeah, good one. There's a bittersweet poem by Robert Hill Long, and I'm going to save that for another time too. I hadn't seen it in a while. The Guitar Showing My Age. He's sort of remembering how he used to play all the time, and because life stepped in and family and other commitments, he sort of longs to go back there, but he remembers all the playing that he did, happiness he had around that. But let's go on. I spoke of scents in my opening poem and just a little back in our sharings, and I'm curious what ones have triggered deep nostalgia in you or still do. I'd love to hear, actually, have you share with me, among other sharings that you might feel you'd like to do with me anytime. You could always write me an email. I'd like that. But this is from yourtango.com and has all these words for emotions you feel but can't explain. But this is the one number 5, is Vellichor, Vellichor. We've all explored bookstores and been amazed by the smells and nostalgia. Well, Vellichor is the strange wistfulness of stepping foot into a used bookstore, being filled with nostalgia, and letting the scent of old pages trigger that longing. I never knew there was a word for it, and I have done that so often for so many decades, that entering for that reason, as well as to nose around and discover things. So I like the fact there's a word for it. Bruce Hood has a book called The Self-Illusion, How Our Social Brain Constructs Who We Are. You might want to check that out. I thought it was very interesting. I had a few lines from it, but I just want to, maybe I'll read this last piece because I want to keep us in relatively good time. The daily experience of the self is so familiar, and yet the brain science shows that this sense of the self is an illusion. Psychologist Susan Blackmore makes the point that the word illusion does not mean that it does not exist. Rather, an illusion is not what it seems. We all certainly experience some form of self, but what we experience is a powerful depiction generated by our brains for our own benefit. So, yeah, he traces how the self emerges in childhood and examines why this notion of the illusory self is among the hardest concepts to accept. The self-illusion. Okay. Well, A.E. Stallings, Stallings, gives us an interesting perspective on the fleeting, the impermanent in this poem. After a Greek proverb, and he has a proverb written in Greek, but I only speak a little Greek, so I can't read this. We're here for the time being, I answer to the query. Just for a couple of years, we said a dozen years back. Nothing is more permanent than the temporary. We dined sitting on folding chairs. They were cheap but cheery. We've taped the broken window pane, TV still out of whack. We're here for the time being, I answer to the query. When we crossed the water, we only brought what we could carry, but there are always boxes that you never do unpack. Nothing is more permanent than the temporary. Sometimes when I'm feeling weepy, you propose a theory. Nostalgia and tear gas have the same acrid smack. We're here for the time being, I answer to the query. We stash bones in the closet when we don't have time to bury, stuff receipts and envelopes, file papers in a stack. Nothing is more permanent than the temporary. 12 years now, and we're still eating off the ordinary. We left our wedding china behind, afraid that it might crack. We're here for the time being. We answer to the query. But nothing is more permanent than the temporary. right, coming now to our last handful of musings and sharings for this week. Sigmund Byrd, B-Y-R-D, The Republic of Longing. Think of it as a separate country with a distinct climate, customs, national dish, and a language exuberant with maddening diphthongs and exceptions to the rule that you either catch on too quickly or manage to mangle every time. Of course, everyone's been there at least once. In some faces, the passport stamp glows like a flare at the scene of an accident. Others toss off long-winded stories, chance encounters as souvenirs about Hamdi or Yosef the wrestler, the eggplant woman hawking prophecies in the arcade. Or who could forget the young couple sitting stiffly in the back of a rickety hay wagon, riding to church on the day of their wedding? No need for film, a sophisticated camera. Such countries sear themselves into the backs of your eyes. Even a crusty slice of bread reminds you of some enchanted repast, a rain-swollen night spent under that palm frond veranda, a certain herb liqueur's fumes on the tongue. Oh, surely you could find it here, too, in some distillate, antecedent form, waiting for you to taste again. One breath, and you're back on that street, searching, passing this, then that steamed restaurant window and prefix menu. The gaslights, still popular in the Republic, cast an amber, otherworldly glow over your heart. But you keep walking. It's here somewhere, you're confident. On the next corner, perhaps, on the other side of the plaza, across the chain bridge, past the monastery wall. You'll find it by the Museum of Musical Instruments, up the embankment, down the stairs. Young as you are, old as you've been, and then it comes to you suddenly. The guidebooks were wrong. You've never been more certain in all your life of the voice inside you whispering, "You must leave this place and never return. Go home. Go home while you still can." Sigmund Byrd, thank you. The Republic of Longing. Melissa Salma has this poem, Reminiscings. This is from the Spanish, translated by Janet McAdams. I explore old waters. I search for the first fire. Infancy, that house filled with ghosts, my grandmother's courtyard, the earth, the trees from which I'm made, the guava smashing against the patio's red tiles mid-afternoon, afternoons where I watched life pass by from a sidewalk. And I fooled myself believing my hands were made to narrate the world. I write, that's for sure. There's so much I want to name, and that I can't. So much life slipping through my hands, so much shadow ruffling my hair, so many words suspended in the air, minuscule dust particles lit by the light from the window, that I must shake off the way someone shakes off the last layer of skin. And I lie if I say that it's stone, mountain, sea, river, the birds taking flight, the corners of a house, my grandmother's face, her numerous ghosts, the ones who today ask to be counted. There is so much that I want to name and that I cannot. I write, that's for sure. Death from the other side is levitating. Gracias, Melissa Salma. Here's Langston Hughes's poem, Homesick Blues.
The railroad bridge is a sad song in the air. The railroad bridge is a sad song in the air. Every time the trains pass, I wants to go somewhere. I went down to the station, my heart was in my mouth. Went down to the station, heart was in my mouth. Looking for a boxcar to roll me to the south. Homesick blues, Lord, it's a terrible thing to have. Homesick blues is a terrible thing to have. To keep from crying, I opens my mouth and laughs.
Thank you, Langston Hughes. Albert Camus said every act of rebellion expresses a nostalgia for innocence and an appeal to the essence of being. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin said, a sense of the universe, a sense of the awe, the nostalgia which seizes us when confronted by nature, beauty, music, these seem to be an expectation and awareness of a great presence. Yes. Well, we've been getting everything on the spectrum, yes, from the sweet and cherished to the bittersweet and even the painful and everything else. And lonesomeness can be part of nostalgia. Sometimes that can be sweet in its way. Yes, life experiences of homesickness for a long gone home, not least. This is Liesel Müller's poem, The Lonesome Dream. In the America of the dream, the first rise of the moon swings free of the ocean, and she reigns in her shining flesh over a good great valley of plumped, untrampled grasses and beasts with solemn eyes, of lovers infallibly pitched in their ascendant phase. In this America death is virginal also, roaming the good great valley in his huge boots, his shadow steady and lean, his pistol silver, his greeting clear and courteous as a stranger's who looks for another, a mind to share his peaceable evenings. Dreaming, we are another race that the one which wakes in the cold sweat of fear, fires wild shots at death, builds slippery towers of glass to head him off, waylays him with alcohol traps, rides him down in canyons of sex, and hides in teetering ghost towns. Dreaming, we are the mad who swear by the blood of trees and speak with the tongues of streams, through props of steel and sawdust. A colony of souls ravaged by visions, bound to some wild, secret cove not yet possessed, a place still innocent of us. The Lonesome Dream. Thank you, Liesel Müller, from her collection Alive Together. C.S. Lewis, the philosopher, storyteller, the beloved Narnia creator, and modern mystic, on what we long for in our existential longing. This is from his book, The Weight of Glory. The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them. It only came through them. And what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never visited. Next to last, maybe we're each and all extraordinary time travelers. The time traveler. One who can swim backward and forward in time, sing into the distant past, and be at ease there among ancients, relics, antecedents. Flash far into the future and mingle, spangle with its possibilities, its other realities. Who can even suspend the hour and minute hands of the moment's clock and travel blithely, spaciously into timelessness. And last for now, till we're together again over these airwaves, my fellow life explorers, like the tide. This ever-changing life of ours, restless and constant in its arrivals and departures, ephemeral and confederal, bringing friendships, moments, enlightenments in, carrying lives, chapters, sentiments out, showing us its natural flow of highs and lows, fullness and ebbings, its breathing-like balancing act, the beauty and mystery of our earth-shared impermanency. Thank you again, friends, for leaning in, thinking and feeling in, for bringing your own senses and experiences of the nostalgic. Also, appreciation for you sharing this and other show links with friends or posting them out to your social media. Please do, since word of mouth is golden. It helps others find these shows. I invite, as always, your comments from listening to hear what resonates with you. I also invite your support of these weekly programs, made with much care and consciousness to enlighten and inspirit you. And is there any yet-to-be-explored theme you'd like to have a future broadcast on? If so, send an email to me with your suggestion, colin@thepoetisphere.com. And what about your experience of this show on nostalgia? What has it evoked? What other reflections might it spark now or later? And if, by the way, you are making a contribution, thank you very much. You can do so by Venmo to Fivefold, FIVEFOLD, at pipeline.com, or by PayPal to the same email. Or mail a check along to me, to P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891. Or donate through my site, thepoetorialist.com, by way of the Donate tab. For those newly here, patrons can at times privately host or sponsor me at times as a working poet in residence in the U.S. or beyond to create a new flight of poetic art and dedicate it to that patron or sponsor. And if that's you, email me to explore. Meanwhile, you can hear all the broadcasts online on YouTube on the Floating Poetry playlist. You can also explore as a visitor or subscriber the Poetosphere, an oasis of regenesis for seekers of greater aliveness and possibility that I'm guiding, thepoetosphere.com. I do invite you to enter the many kinds of vitalizing and catalyzing possible there. Meanwhile, I hope you lean in here soon again. Until then, dear listeners, let's experience and enjoy the best dimensions of nostalgia when it arises, when it surprises, each in our own way. Let's be glad and grateful that we have things to be nostalgic about. And let's create moments and memories in present time to clasp to our breasts that become tender touchstones out in our futures. Yes. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.